Right now, recombinant proteins are typically produced by microbes in big steel bioreactors. But could the humble fruit fly give them a run for their money?
Essentially, we're a biomanufacturing platform. We use fruit flies, genetically engineered fruit flies, to produce proteins. There's many advantages of that. Really, the main thing is, the scalability and cost of it. We can scale insects incredibly well to monstrous scales compared to fermentation and other cell-based systems, mainly because of the infrastructure requirements. Bioreactors are expensive, they're costly, they're energy intensive, and they're hard to procure. Versus what we do, the infrastructure is minimal, so it allows us to scale much more effectively. There's a lot of other advantages in terms of the quality of the proteins that we can produce, the speed, because fermentation and cell-based systems, they're incredibly engineered, and they're very fragile. You have very specific conditions you need to create in order to get cells to grow well and produce a protein. Perturbations to any of the variables within that system can totally cause your production run to lose product, to change the product. Fruit flies are incredibly resilient, especially as a manufacturing platform. They can handle these perturbations, still get great yields, still produce a quality product. So it's I'd call it a very robust, resilient production system.
Because you've talked in the past about having superior machinery, if you like, versus say bacteria or yeast to facilitate this complex kind of protein production.
Yeah, and that's really what it comes down to. E. coli and yeast, yes, they're pretty cheap to grow, but E. coli lack any sort of post-translational modification, so you're very limited to the types of proteins you can produce. Yeast, they can do some, but it's a lot further from a mammalian system, which is typically what we're trying to produce, is a mammalian type protein or human protein. It's very challenging to do that even in yeast systems. The glycan profile is very, very different. Insects are much more similar. They have a very similar profile. It gives us the ability to produce more complex proteins, but also we're the only system that's producing multiple cell types at scale, and we can target expression of proteins to those specific cell types. So it gives us a much wider, more versatile toolkit to work with to produce these proteins.
So tell me a bit about raising fruit flies. How low maintenance are they compared to microbes? What do they need to flourish?
Yeah, like I said, much more resilient.
Yeah.
The conditions that we create for them, the optimal conditions that we do create for them, they're not that difficult to make. Fruit flies prefer 25 degrees Celsius, so it's barely above room temperature. They produce, or they prefer slightly higher humidity, but these are not conditions that are difficult to create. Again, in stark contrast to cell-based systems, which require, again, an incredibly engineered environment that cannot handle perturbations. So it's relatively simple. To scale it up has required a significant amount of optimization on our end, and I wouldn't say it's out of the box simple. We have done a lot of work, and to say it's simple would be an insult to the incredible work my team has done. But in terms of ability to scale, it's pretty tremendous.
So just briefly in layman's terms, how do you get a fruit fly to produce these fancy proteins? Are you kind of taking a DNA sequence, encoding a target protein and kind of inserting it into the genome of a fruit fly? How are you doing it?
Yeah, the beauty of what we do is we get to leverage 120 years of scientific research on the fruit fly. We get to stand on the shoulders of a lot of brilliant researchers that came before us and built a lot of really great genetic tools. So because of that, again, we have more room to play with. So what we do is we basically build a plasmid, which is a circular piece of DNA that has our gene of interest in it and what we want to make. That gets inserted into the genome. This is a pretty straightforward process. Basically, it's inserted at the embryo stage, and once you get that integration, that embryo, once it then grows into an adult fly, can then pass that gene on to
the next generation of flies has the machinery to make these proteins going forward. Okay. So if fruit flies are such great production vehicles for these proteins, why isn't everybody using them?
That's a great question, and I ask myself that, and you probably have to ask the other people, because I don't know. It seems so obvious to me, but I think the big thing is there hasn't been a big reason to change until recently. Recombinant technology is 40-ish years old. The systems they have done the job for what they need so far. So I don't think there's been a big impetus to change until now. And I think ultimately there's a lot of sunk cost into it. There's a lot of infrastructure that's already been built for those systems. And so the big companies that do this stuff, there's some resistance to change because of that sunk cost.
So there's a lot of skepticism at the moment about the cultivated meat industry. If for any reason that just doesn't take off in the next few years, will you still have a business?
Yeah. I mean, I think any business like ours that has a new technology that's solving one of the pain points in cultivated meat, I think it'd be very challenging to raise more capital if that's your only market, just because of the way the investor sentiments have changed. So fortunately for us, our platform, like I said, can be used in so many different markets, and the ability to diversify is very easy for us, and we've already started that. But yeah, I think ultimately that's going to be a big challenge for some of these infrastructure kind of supporters within the industry. There needs to be some sort of diversification or ability for multiple sources of revenue, because I think it's things are just going to take longer within the industry, and the investors, I think, are not as patient as they used to be.
So what kind of proteins can you make with your technology that would be relevant to cultivated meat media?
Yeah, I mean, most of what cultivated meat producers need are growth factors, so we're already producing those.
Such as?
FGF2, Activin A, PDGFBB. Some of those we're already have in production, some of which are still in development. And then there's kind of more traditional recombinant proteins that are used in cell culture, like insulin, albumin, transferrin. Those are things we can make as well and have made. So I guess the point is we can provide a complete solution. We have a number of companies that are really, really happy with the product, and we are using particularly our FGF2 in their processes to do scale up, to create prototypes that are used in tastings, and so we've seen really good success there.
You recently raised 11.2 million in a seed extension round. What have you been spending the money on? Yeah,
mostly scale up and more product development. So part of that round came with a fair chunk of non-dilutive funding from the government of Canada, which we're incredibly grateful for. So we're building on our pilot facility. We've broke ground now. We have the space. So it's in progress. We'll be operational in there probably by January, February of next year. So that's a big part, scale up, and yeah, just more product development.
And what kind of quantities can it make, or will it be able to make?
Oh, we'll be pretty large scale, kilogram quantities within that pilot facility. Yeah.